Good morning to everybody, and a very warm welcome to all of you. Uh, Wait a second, I just,
No, I'll handle that. You carry on.
all right. This is an event which has been organized in order to commemorate the Madras Week celebrations that is in progress here in Madras. It's happening between the 17th and the 24th. The Madras Naturalist Society usually conducts between 3 and 5 events as part of the Madras Week celebrations, but this year, because of the fact that one cannot assemble and be physically present in a given location, we decided to have just this one webinar. So really a very warm welcome to everyone who's joined in here this morning. And this is also significant because it commemorates the 381st birthday of Madras, where most of us have been born and are currently living in. Request all participants to switch off your video and your mics, excepting Kumaran, UN, and Umesh Mani. Thank you. For those who are not members of the Madras Naturalist Society, and we hope that at the end of this session, you will mail me again asking to become a member. Just a very brief, what the Madras Naturalist Society is 42 years as of now. It's established in 1978 by a group of 16 who were so enthused with nature, got together and said that we should spread awareness about nature and conservation of nature among the citizens of Madras, which is now called Chennai, of course. And so that's how the MNS, as it's popularly known as, was born. And MNS, as it is one that I always say, is very active, although we are not activists. And we have done tremendous amount of work to conserve the green spaces here in and around Chennai, which has now become a constant battle, and we're facing it in our own way. The Madras Naturalist Society physically meets, emphasizing on this word physically because we really stopped physically meeting from the April of this year. We physically meet on the second Sunday of every month at the Alcott Memorial High School, which is opposite to Rajaji Bhavan in Besanagar on Besant Avenue. We have a regular monthly bulletin. We have a very active Google group, a very, very active WhatsApp group, and we conduct field trips, and we also publish a quarterly journal by name Black Buck. We do undertake surveys and projects on our own, and we do everything that we can to spread awareness among the children, the youth in Madras. So welcome again to this talk by Kumaran Sadashivam. Now Kumaran is a naval architect who also went on to do his mechanical engineering, both of which he did from the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. Yeah, somebody is there whose mic is on, if you don't mind.
Okay.
And he went on to complete his MS in mechanical engineering, and I think moved on to a lot of other things. Kumaran is really a multifaceted personality. He continues to be associated with IIT Madras, of course. He does a lot of consulting work with them. And I think he really enjoyed his time when he was there. There was so much that I think he internalized that in the year 1991, he wrote and published a book called Forest in the City. It's all about the forest that IIT Madras once was. And thereon went on to get very interested in marine mammals. In fact, he for 30 species out of 120 marine mammals which you find in the country are in and around 120 species in the world. 30 species are there in and around the waters in and around India. And he wrote this book called The Marine Mammals of India, the year 2004, with support from WWF India, which is actually a path-breaking book because it was not only anecdotal about the marine mammals, but also, scientifically grounded, that it's also used as a reference book for those who do research on marine mammals. So from whales to dolphins to dugongs. I mean, he's a good birder also. I have birded with him. In fact, that's when I discovered his interest, and not only his wife's, Ramila's interest too, in dragonflies. We were on this, ostensibly on this survey in GNP, looking out for birds and trying to make records of what we were seeing. When I found that Ramla had dropped back a bit, turned around to see that she was photographing something into a bush. So Kumaran was also not very far away from where she was, and so I quietly walked up to her, and then she showed me this wonderful large, dragonfly, also known as the lesser green emperor, Anax indicus. And for the next 1.5 hours that we were there in GNP, we stopped birding and we were dragonflying. And of course, one had only known about the wandering glider or the common glider, of course, the picture wing, the common picture wing, etc. But then we ended up seeing, and I got introduced to the blues in dragonflies, the blues and the butterflies, which one knows of, the blues and the dragonflies, and it was very interesting, very, very exciting. And Kumaran's, I think, journey from the birds to the small mammals to dolphins, whales, dugongs. Dugongs especially, he's still very concerned and fights to conserve this endangered species in the Gulf of Mannar. To dragonflies, I'm sure, has been a great journey. We will hear it from him firsthand. Over to you, Kumaran.
Thank you, Vijay. Good morning to everyone. I welcome you to this talk that I've been invited to give as part of the Madras Week celebrations of the Madras Naturalist Society. I think it's a great privilege, and it's my pleasure to talk about the dragonflies of Madras with you. I think dragonflies are extremely fascinating. They are wonderful to look at, and what science tells us about their lives, the way they work, is makes them even more interesting, sort of super insect, if you would like to use that term. That I'm truly surprised how little attention they have received till now. It's almost as though the dragonflies have been conspiring to stay out of our sight. My experience with dragonflies in general and in Madras has been the pursuit of these insects, to look at them and to wonder at them, and significantly to get photographs. I think digital photography has played a large role in making dragonflies accessible to naturalists in general and to popularizing themselves. So whereas they were trying to stay out of our sight, now digital photography has brought them to the forefront, or is increasingly doing so. My experience, as I said, goes back a number of years now to the time when digital photography began, and I started using a digital camera for the first time. So that's when I found out that they gave you photographs that you could keep, transmit, and use for identification. Identification being such an important aspect of natural history, because it allows you to attach a lot of information that to names, and to make a difference to the way you look at living things. I'm illustrating my talk with these photographs that I've been taking over the years. And my brother suggests that we minimize the zoom window so that the pictures are entirely visible, because many of the pictures tend to be towards the right side in my presentation, which is exactly where my Zoom panel is sitting at the moment. The talk itself is roughly divided into some 4 parts. In the first section, I talk about how I went about looking at dragonflies in Chennai in particular, and Chennai and surrounding areas, the highlights of the experiences over the last few years, as it were, and go on to looking at what it means in terms of a list of dragonflies that we have for Madras, and how the dragonfly fauna has changed over the years. Then I go on to talk about dragonflies in general and what affects which dragonfly is found where, before finally going back to the field and talking about the exciting possibilities that still exist for anyone who's interested in looking at dragonflies, with the idea of discovering new things. So let me go to the beginning, to 2003, when this Handycam, which had a 1 megapixel still camera built into it, was being used by me after having acquired it some months back, the previous year. 2003, February, it was a very pleasant morning, I think, and well, that is the pleasant time of the year in Madras. And I was out there somewhere near Chengalpet on a very exciting and unusual kind of with my family. We were going to be shown rats and mice that live in the fields around that area by the Irula people, courtesy the Crocodile Bank, who were able to enlist the help of some of these people to take us around. So the purpose of the visit was to look at the rodents, the small mammals of that area. And this was in itself extremely exciting, because they would show us animals very easily. They would excavate burrows and pull out mice and rats to show us and to photograph. And we were able to put names to the mammals like spiny field mouse, or the metad, or the gerbil. Things that had really been just names in books until then, because of the fact that we had not seen illustrations of these animals, but only had descriptions of. Apparently the Irulas eat the rats, so that's a bit unfortunate, I thought, because I rather liked all the animals which were being shown to us. Nevertheless, what's of relevance to today's topic is that there was this green marsh hawk by the side, which drew my attention, and that was my first digital photograph of a dragonfly at all. This is a purely personal, of a personal significance, but in the broader context, people were beginning to shoot freely because of the freedom that digital photography afforded. Unlike in the past, where you had to think a lot before spending on what could be a poor shot on expensive film. So I did not know the name of this dragonfly, and of course I was very keen to name it, but I had to wait for some time before doing that. In the meantime, a lot of time passed. And the next exciting one, the dragonfly picture that I obtained, was this one about a year later at Jinji, which really is a bit of a stretch of the imagination to call Madras, but I suppose it's in striking distance, so I'm allowed the liberty of putting that photograph here. Again, I did not know the name of this dragonfly, but I thought it was so unusual, so exotic, and it was a bit difficult to say whether the digital photograph was more pleasing or the original, because on the screen you could enlarge it to your heart's content and see so much detail which you did not see in real life. The wings, the shine of the wings, the pattern, what looks like warning coloration. One worried whether this dragonfly could sting you like a bee or a wasp. Later, I came to know that this was called the picker wing, and of course, I saw it many more times later. But this insect was pointed out to me by Mr. Sudhakar, who was with me on that trip. It happened that we were again looking for something else, not mice this time, but it was for the birds of Gingy, which a visitor from Europe was keen to see. I believe the bulbul was the target that day, where we did not see the bulbul, but we did see this, so this was most rewarding. So this kind of desultory shooting was something I indulged in, and whenever there was a camera in hand and a dragonfly showed up, I would add a picture to my collection. At this time, as I said, there were no books available, no popular books such as the Handbook of Indian Birds or the books available for butterflies and so forth. So there was no question of identifying them. And thus it was that it was purely by luck and by chance that I found out that there was an entomologist who taught at Trishur, in a college there, Dr. Franci Kakkasiri, who was not only a museum entomologist, but also a field naturalist. So he was one of those rare individuals who could make that connection between the highly technical books that were available then, in the Fauna British India series particularly, and in some of the other scientific journals, and what they saw in real life, the living insects that you see around you. This was very exciting. And so the process was then that I would copy a whole lot of these pictures onto a CD and mail them to, send them by post to Dr. Franci. And he would write back to me. By then, mail had come in, of course, I was using email, but the pictures were too large to attach to emails at that time because the speeds were so slow. Because we had to work so hard for all this information, I think the information registered a little more deeply at that point. The next phase of photography came when I graduated to another camera, and my wife and I went to Adayar Punga one November, a few years later, and we discovered that it was literally buzzing with dragonflies. At least it felt so. They were not buzzing, but they were sitting all around, and they were most tolerant. Dragonflies are incredibly tolerant if you approach them closely. And so you can get to the point where you can look at the veins on their wings, the appendages, and the little antennae they have. You wouldn't look at it, think it to look at a dragonfly, but it does have antennae. And if you look at this picture here of this marsh trotter, also known as saddlebags, also known as Tramia basilaris, that it has this little hair-like antenna. That's the antenna of the size of the antenna of a dragonfly or damselfly. And we had a very grand time photographing these. From this point on, my wife was also constantly with me on these dragonfly watching and photographing trips that I undertook. Still, it was not a mission as such at this point. But when we were at Adayar Punga, we would wonder at the other dragonflies that we found there, such as this group of wandering gliders, Pantala flavescens. In this case, there are the female members roosting here on a tree, on a bush. The males are a lot more red in appearance. And take pictures of these. And another place that we discovered at that time, which was interesting for dragonfly photography, was the TS, Theosophical Society campus. In particular, we used to see this damselfly here, now indulging here in this picture in a spot of cannibalism. A very beautiful damselfly of the purest yellow. At least the male is bright yellow. The female, which you see eating the male, poor hapless male here, is duller in color. They have this green thorax and the green head and so on. And this is a regular at the pond that used to be full of water at the Buddhist temple at the Theosophical Society campus. So we were enjoying our dragonfly. We repeatedly visited here. I was particularly encouraged by the good weather that prevailed in January, February, and so on in the city. The next phase, or the next highlight that I would like to show you is the Guindy survey, the Guindy National Park survey that Mr. Vijay Kumar mentioned to you in his introduction. In 2015, in October, the plans were afoot for a bird and butterfly survey at Guindy National Park. What was to come was a year-long survey with multiple members of the Madras Naturalist Society participating to document these bird and butterfly life of the park. As Mr. Vijay Kumar has hinted to you, I had an ulterior motive for joining the survey. Apart from looking at the birds and the butterflies and everything else that is there in Guindy National Park, we saw this, my wife and I saw this as an opportunity to look at one particular place in an organized way, to look systematically across seasons, to see what kind of dragonflies are found there in the first place, and to see what happens as the seasons changed. So at that introductory meeting where there were several members participating, we reached the southern end of the park, and at the pond, the water level was fairly low, and the water was very muddy, thanks to some rain which had happened the previous week. But the water level was low. And apparently that was sufficient encouragement for the dragonflies to start laying eggs. We found this clubtail, the common clubtail, perched very close to the water, which was very suggestive. And there were damselflies, the spread wings, which were actually laying eggs. So it was a very auspicious beginning, as it were, for a survey to begin. What happened was that the season that followed was the season of the extremely heavy rains and the floods. So we could not take off with the survey immediately, but soon, the next year, we were there at Guindy National Park again. 30th January, the next year, we were there for the first survey. And it also happened to be beginner's luck in the sense that we found this damselfly, which we have not found in the city ever since. Which is not to say that it's not found at all. I will come into that, talk about that a little later in my talk. Possibly it's there in some places and some seasons, but in our experience, we had not seen this ever again. By coincidence, or perhaps because of the reasons involved, the same reasons involved, there was another one of these damselflies in IIT at the same time, which suggests that a small group of these insects had come from a common source. The survey continued. We would join the group every morning, early morning, and set out for the walk, look at the birds, the butterflies, and the dragonflies. One of the dragonflies that I frequently associate with Guindy National Park, particularly considering that it's not exceptionally full of water bodies, and dragonflies are thought of as water-loving insects, is that we fairly regularly saw this insect, the light-tipped demon, or Indothemis carnatica. And this insect, this dragonfly, is known to be found far from water, almost as though it preferred dry areas. On the left is the male in a very rich bluish appearance. Sometimes they can look very dark, absolutely black. But at the tip of the abdomen, you see the white tip. That is a giveaway about to their identity. A bigger challenge to identifying them is the female on the right side of the screen. A very dull pattern which hardly helps you. There's hardly anything significant about it. But because of sometimes of its proximity with the male, and sometimes because you just got used to seeing it, you recognize it by its stance and by the way it stays far away from water and so forth. The summer wore on. it was becoming extremely humid in the walks. We used to go relentlessly. We used to plow on every day. Every 2 weeks or so, we used to go in and conduct our survey. It was beginning to be a strain because by 8 o'clock we were sweating profusely and we were really thinking of head back, even though we had not completed as large a transect as we would have liked to have done. But the lure was that we were beginning to see new species, which we had not seen ever before. And apparently they were emerging from somewhere. Now, this is something to be found out. We have found large exuviae, the exoskeleton which is cast off by dragonflies at the ponds. And possibly these dragonflies were emerging after a number of other dragonflies had completed their life cycles or had dispersed. And possibly the temperature was what was bringing them out. They were reveling in it, as it were. So this is the common torrent hawk. It belongs to a family called the Macromidae, the only representative in Madras. And it's just a pleasure to look at them, the blue eyes and the pattern, the striking large wings and so on. And so we continued the survey. The survey went on for the year and went beyond the scheduled time, I think. I think we went on for close to a year and 3 months or so. Anyway, we continued to go in. And that was truly a highlight of the Madras dragon flying experience. I would like to reach this point here, highlight this dull insect that you see here as another highlight. I found it quite by chance sitting on a wall on the third floor of a departmental building at IIT Madras when I was participating in a program, in an program entirely unrelated to dragonflies, but I did have a camera in hand and I took this picture. And like so many other pictures that we end up with, I did not know what it was at that time. I must say that by this time, there were a number of resources that were available to the dragonfly enthusiast. Dr. Subramaniam of the ZSI had brought out his first book on the dragonflies and damselflies of India. And there were websites such as Asia Dragonfly had a broad scope and allowed you to identify pictures by just browsing through the pictures that were hosted online. It was a sort of citizen science program, an early one of its kind. I'm not even sure that site exists now, but it was a very valuable resource at that time. So by this time, we were beginning to identify dragonflies by ourselves. But there were still these difficult ones, which confusing, and we didn't know what to say. On the whole, this picture, this dragonfly looked like, and the way it was sitting on the wall, like the one that's known as a granite ghost. But you look closely at it, you see those brown patches at the bases of the hind wings, and you look at the white appendages, and you look at the wing spots, that pterostigmata on the wings. These tell you that it's not quite a granite ghost, even though it looks so much like one. The truth about this dragonfly was revealed to me only in May this year. Around the same time that I took this photograph, others were taking pictures of the same species in an entirely different part of the country, in Maharashtra, along the coast there. And it turns out that this is actually a new species, a species new to science. When I came across this publication, a bell rang somewhere, and I got in touch with the authors of the publication, of the authors who described the new species, and sent them my photograph. They thought that this was quite possibly the new species that they had discovered and described. So that was a very exciting moment this summer when I realized that I had seen a new species at roughly the same time that somebody else had been seeing it in a different part of the country. So there may be more species which we do not, which we are not aware of, even here, where you would think a lot of people have already looked at everything that is to look at. So after a point this year, we were thinking about writing up a report on the dragonflies of Guindy National Park based on our experience of looking at dragonflies through the year in one location. But the more we thought about it, the more it was clear that it was more sensible to look at the broader context in which these dragonflies were found and to put together a list of Madras dragonflies. And that was how we started working on this issue of the last issue of Black Buck. Now I go back to the historical records, because that's what we started looking at when we were writing up the report on the Madras dragonflies. It was very interesting to note that the father of Indian ornithology, as it were, F.C. Fraser, had been in Madras at a certain point in his career. F.C. Fraser, as you will probably know, was a very remarkable person in the sense that being a medical doctor, a surgeon, and a doctor in the army to bargain, was entirely devoted to the study of dragonflies. He spent close to 30 years, maybe 25 or 30 years in India, having come here in 1907 after working as a doctor for a couple of years in England. And as a young man, he came in and started studying dragonflies right away. His work posted him in at different locations in India and occasionally took him out of India as well, because he had to serve during the World War and in Mesopotamia. And at some point he went to Burma, but he was a Madras man at one point. So this was, of course, very exciting, and expectations were high with me, because he would have set the baseline information for the Madras dragonflies. But no, it appears that Fraser was in Madras more or less at the end of his career, shortly before retirement. He held a professorship at the medical college, one of the medical colleges here. And perhaps he didn't have the time to go about his dragon flying activities. But Fraser, remarkable man that he was, he went on to become a world authority after he went back to England. He told us something very interesting about one particular species. He talked about this species called Cyclogomphus heterostylus, a gomphid dragonfly, dragonfly belonging to the family Gomphidae. And we have exactly one other species from that family in Madras, the common clubtail. But this one seems to be rare. Fraser talks about finding a clubtail, this clubtail, along what he called the Coombe River. These quaint spellings that they used about 100 years back or even 80 years back. And that was the preferred habitat of this dragonfly. He has even given the dates of some of the of his collections of this specimen, of specimens of this species. And so this is something for us to look at, because it is a rare dragonfly all across India. The only other place that Fraser mentions is Pune. That's the only other location that he knew of where this dragonfly was found. Nowhere in between or anywhere else was it found in India. So it makes it, in many ways, a Madras clubtail. So I've taken the liberty of calling it that in the Black Buck issue that I published recently. I went looking for this dragonfly a couple of times in what I thought were appropriate areas. We all know, of course, that the condition of the river close to the city or inside the city look conducive for dragonflies. So I went further afield towards Tiruvallur and beyond, and I did not find it. It was dry by the time I went. It was about late January or February, and there was no water there. At the next opportunity or the next season that looks likely, we really should look for this dragonfly to re-establish that it is it still remains a Madras club tail, even though now there's a new location which a site record for this dragonfly in West Bengal. So it's a most curiously distributed insect that we can claim to call the Madras club tail. The list of dragonflies is in Madras now is published in the Black Book. It has about more than 40 species, which sounds like a reasonable number for any location in the plains or coast of India. We have a good list for the New Delhi. There's a book on the New Delhi dragonflies and damselflies, and there too, maybe by coincidence, it's 42 species that have been recorded there. But what's of significance is that it's not the same 42 species. There are maybe about 20 in common. The rest are all, the other 20 are unique to Madras, and there are 20 unique to Delhi if you compare these two cities. This tells us something about the dragonfly distribution. It's not as though it's a uniform across all cities and all locations in the plains of India. As you move from one location to other, the species composition is changing. What perhaps of concern to us is that 5 species that were recorded by other observers in the past had not been seen by me and my wife. And one of these can be discounted because it is possibly a dubious identification, Rhyothymis phyllis. But there are 4 other species left, which we did not come across. And so we tried to give reasons for why that should be so. If something had been seen in 1970 or so and we were not seeing it, what had happened in the interim? So it's a quick armchair solution to say that it is because habitat loss has taken place. One just needs to go back to some of the older maps of Madras, and you see that there were large water tanks in what is today CLRI and IIT, in T Nagar, Nungambakam, very large water tanks indeed. And they are, of course, entirely gone. So possibly a species like the crimson marsh glider, which we did not come across in the city, has been sensitive to these changes and disappeared. And possibly pollution is playing its role because we know how water bodies are going increasingly. There was some kind of support for this kind of explanation, in that we would find certain species only in the outskirts of the city. I have shown 2 examples here. The long-legged marsh glider was something that we used to see at Sholinganallur. It possibly still continues to be found there, but we have not found it further north in Adyar or in IIT or so. And in February this year, I went on this trip to the Kuam Lake, as I told you, to look for Cyclogomphus heterostylus. And that area, which is well removed from the city, was full of this species, Trithemis pallidinervis, long-legged marsh glider, sitting practically everywhere. It looked like it was buzzing with them again. Similarly, we found this one record that we have of Pseudagrion decorum, this damselfly, in the Kuam Lake. We had a very enjoyable outing there with Dr. Santaram when we saw this species. And of course, we also looked at the birds there. So if one has a sort of mental model of how dragonflies live, they're attached to a sort of parental home, a water body, a pond, and they live their lives fairly close to it, and their young ones come out of it and remain in the same area and so on. But that explanation, that kind of model fails when you look at some other species. And so that's why we move on to the next section of this presentation, where we look at the seasons and the physical distribution of the dragonflies and damselflies of Madras, and why they should be seasonal is the big question. To begin with, there are these species, some species which have been found practically through the year. This species, the yellow-tailed ashy skimmer, Potamarca congener, is I think the only species that we saw in all 12 months of the year over these 17 years for which we had data. And so that makes it a very likely candidate for one that fits that model that I talked to you about, that one that is born, lives, and dies in the city. Another species that comes close to filling that, fitting in with that model is this damselfly again, which we saw, the one with the cannibalistic tendencies. At Theosophical Society, here the male maybe not unaware of its fate, sitting on a flower. And I think we have recorded this species in most months of the year. The problem with the idea of a permanent home where the dragonflies live is that there would be more and more young ones coming out, the next generation and next generation, so on. So there would be a lot of competition for the food that they need to and space that they need to occupy, the water bodies in which they need to lay eggs. So the fact is that we need to account for dispersal of dragonflies. All insects are known to disperse, just like many other living things, most other living things. And we start thinking seriously about where they come from and where they go if they are dispersers. We saw species that are clearly dispersers or seem to be dispersers because they were found only in very specific months, such as this damselfly, the blue damselfly, the blue grasp dart. It was probably seen only in 3 months in a year. Just after the rains is when I would typically see this. And the rest of the year, it is not found in Madras. One could say that the young ones are living in the water, in the ponds, possibly. These are some things we need to find out through more observations. Similarly, the picture wing that I referred to earlier is also not found throughout the year. At least we do not have records throughout the year. We need to verify whether it is really a case of overlooking some of them or whether they really are dispersers in and out of the city. So that is the big question now. Do they live in the water and stay here, or do they go away? And if go away, where do they go? If they are coming in, where do they come from? And the question becomes even more interesting when you see small, the damselflies like this one. This is the pygmy wisp, the pygmy dartlet, which is extremely small in size. One wonders how it can perform any reasonable transport from one location to another because it's such a poor flyer. As I said somewhere, obviously it is fast enough to catch its prey, but it looks like that's all it can do. Travel, that seems to be something beyond the capacity of this damselfly. Well, Fraser has pointed out that small damselflies like this are transported by the wind. So it seems to tally with some of the observations that we have that at the change of the season, at the onset of the southwest monsoon or at the onset of the northeast monsoon, we seem to be flooded with these damselflies appearing as though out of nowhere. These are questions to be answered now about the origin of these damselflies and about their life cycle. There are plenty of challenges for the observer of dragonflies in Madras to address. So here then is a sort of working model of what the dragonfly fauna of Madras is, and possibly you can extend this model to any location. There are some of these dragonflies like the wandering glider that are obviously in transit. Think of someone changing flights or changing trains when they are traveling somewhere. Then there are these more passive and active dispersers who are going on shorter trips, who have just come from somewhere or who are going somewhere, who are boarding a flight or a train. And then there are these local people who are staying there because they are looking after the traffic or because they are selling goods to the passengers. So that's the kind of dynamics you create in your mind when you look at what the life in the dragonfly life in a location is. There is one big distinction in the kind of water body that dragonflies like. Some of them are very strongly attached to running water, streams and rivers, whereas others, such as most of those found in Madras, are attached to still water, ponds and lakes and larger water bodies. One day, 1 October again, significantly October when the weather is changing, I saw outside my house on the wiper of a car that had been parked nearby, this blue darner, a very large dragonfly, perched on the wiper there, which had been put up by the cleaner. This is a male with the blue markings, and we have not found it in Madras any other occasion. And so the question was, how far has it come from? Because we had seen this species only in the Western Ghats. We have to go really far away if you are very keen on seeing this particular species. The typical habitat is running water in the mountains. So where did this turn up from? Is this something routine for dragonflies to do? My head was filled with questions at this. And in connection with these questions, and in connection with something else that Fraser had mentioned, we made a visit to another world. Another world, but not very far from Madras, just a couple of hours travel actually. This is the hills in Andhra Pradesh, to the south of Andhra Pradesh, not so far from Tada and Pulicat Lake. The picture shows you the kind of habitat that you find there. It starts off innocuously enough when you start trekking there towards the waterfalls, which is the big draw of that location. And there are a lot of tourists, day trippers, who come there for the experience of having their the waterfall experience. What we found in November last year was that the water was pristine and clear and sparkling. And it appeared that in spite of the incessant traffic of youngsters going up and down and jumping and making a noise and so forth, the habitat was essentially not heavily polluted or disturbed in other ways. And so it was still with a sense of surprise that we found one of the species we had found in the streams of the Western Ghats, this threadtail, this Proteus verticalis, the red striped black threadtail, an incredibly beautiful, incredibly thin damselfly, which, as I say, we have seen only in the Western Ghats till now. More was to come. More running water species were there. Remember, this is 2 hours away from Madras. The Trithemis festiva, also I think known as the indigo dropping, unless I'm mistaken, indigo for the color that you see on the thorax and part of the abdomen with the yellow markings. This is the male. The female is, again, dull, as seems to be the rule with dragonflies. Also, always associated with running water. So here was a different world indeed. But what we were really going for, the holy grail of that trip for us was a species called Protosticta sanguinostigma that Fraser had mentioned. Apparently, there was a report of that species from this area. And again, it was most unexpected because all the other Protostictas, there are some 10 of them of this area, this region, are found in the Western Ghats. They are found in dense forest and the associated water bodies. So we were curious to see whether we could relocate that Protosticta sanguinostigma. And I'm happy to say that we found it. It was a moment to relish when we went close to the waterfalls. We could not make it to the waterfalls, but there, this unassuming, extremely thin insect again was there, a pair of them really, and we managed to secure photographs, thereby establish that this species continues to live where it was found by Dr. Gravelly of the Madras Government Museum in 1923, almost exactly 97 years before today. And this was last year that we rediscovered it. So I have selected this experience to show you that the last word has not been written on the Madras dragonflies. There is much to delight you if you were to take up your looking at these the study of these insects. So I would like to end my talk saying that it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I shall answer questions if I'm able to, if I know the answers. And I wish you happy dragonflying. Thank you.
Thank you, Kumaran. That was a great journey that you took us on. And, you know, it was equally exciting for us to listen to you as it was for you to talk to us. Now, there are a lot of questions, which I think, you can hear me, Kumaran? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, all right. So I'll quickly go through the list and let's see. How does one distinguish between the male and female dragonflies?
Many dragonflies are what is called dimorphic. In the sense, there are two forms. The male and females are quite distinct in appearance in terms of color patterns, which is makes it a difficulty or makes it easy depending on the way you look at it. If your object is to say to distinguish the males and the females, it makes it easier for you. But then you have this plethora of forms. So as I showed in, let's say, the Indothemis carnatica, the dry scrub species, the male and the female are entirely different in color, so color patterns. So it's quite easy to tell those apart. But in the case of some species like the green marsh hawk, the first picture that I showed you, the male and female are very similar. You need to look at the appendages at the tip of the abdomen. They tell you that in the male they are very pronounced, whereas the female, and sometimes they are very strangely shaped. Whereas in the female they are usually much more slender and they are what are known as cerci, sensory organs. In the case of the males, they are used for holding the thorax of the female during the mating and egg-laying processes. So another common or simple way of looking at damselflies and telling them apart when they look, when the male and female look similar, is to look at what is called S2, segment 2, counting from the thorax side towards the tip. S2 is usually very robust, very stout, compared with in the males compared with that of the female. It's quite distinguishable in a photograph in most damselflies.
Yeah. Thanks, Kumaran. The next question is, have you seen any endangered dragonflies?
The dragonflies of India have been assessed through a process for their status by the IUCN. That's the best assessment we have in terms of whether they are endangered or vulnerable or critically endangered and so on. I don't think we have any species here which is critically endangered or even endangered. Though there are a few species, I cannot name them offhand, that are vulnerable. But that's not answering the question really fully, because we hardly have enough data on all the dragonflies. So many dragonflies of India fall under the category data deficient. One suspects that they're really vulnerable because they live in limited areas, particularly the hill species. We need to look more before we can assess their status better. So I would say that species that have not been discovered till now, that have been discovered recently, such as the Bradynopyga concanensis, the Konkan rock dweller, those are species that could potentially be vulnerable because they have only been discovered now.
And just a follow-up to the same question, so that it's clear. How many species are actually listed in the IUCN list in India? Damselflies and dragonflies? How many?
I think they have gone through the checklist. The Indian checklist is about 500. So if they are not able to carry out a true assessment, it is put into the data deficient bucket.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think they've gone through the list.
Okay, so it's about 500 species in all.
Around 500. That's correct.
Yeah. So are there any records of black marsh trotter in Chennai main or Chennai outskirts is the question.
We have seen black marsh trotter in inside the city.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Which is the, where?
Adyar, I'm sure we have seen them in Adyar, in and out of, around our area. I live in Besant Nagar, so
yeah.
In this area I have seen them, yes.
So which is the latest species that has been discovered?
Two species in India. I presume this question relates to India. Yes, two species have been reported in May this year. One was this Konkan rock dweller, which I mentioned to you that I saw in 2016. The other one is from the Andamans. There is an Orthitrum andamanensis that's been described from the Andamans. These are our latest species of India.
Okay. Anyway, Supraja thanks you for the ID key to differentiate between the Konkan rock dweller and the granite ghost. So,
thank you.
Yeah. So this question is, which place in Chennai has the most dragonflies? And even more interesting, who discovered the dragonfly?
We did not carry out an analysis of which location has the maximum number of dragonflies. It's we resisted that. I resisted doing that because obviously there's a bias towards those locations which I was most easily able to visit. So I'm afraid I will not be able to answer that question.
Okay. And who discovered the dragonfly?
The dragonfly?
Who discovered the dragonfly? Yeah. I mean, who discovered dragonfly? I mean, who died?
Dragonflies, yes, the study of dragonflies and classifying them in the group Odonata and so on has a long history. It goes back to the time of Linnaeus, the father of classification. He described several dragonflies themselves. So I think we are following roughly that broad classification, the same classification still. So it goes back to the 18th century. You could call Linnaeus, I think, as the one who discovered them. So that's a little. So some people would argue with that answer. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure. All right. Are there any studies on the intersection of agriculture and Odonata in terms of providing a habitat, pest control, etc.?
Many insect studies in general in India have been derived from entomologists who work with the agricultural angle, and the other major focus has been the medical entomology. So these have been the two major drivers, the ones that have the funding for carrying out studies on insects in general. And as I mentioned at the beginning, dragonflies have somehow evaded the net of these studies. But fortunately for us, the fauna of British India did not have any discrimination of any groups. So dragonflies were very fortunately for us given their due place. And Fraser mentions that some crepuscular dragonflies, the ones that are active in the evening, are voracious feeders of mosquitoes, which emerged at that time. But to answer your question about agriculture, the agricultural universities of India have published studies on the odonate compositions of very specific fields. For instance, I remember there is a paper on the dragonflies of the rice fields of Madurai. There's an agricultural college there, and I think it was the faculty there who published a paper. But I think studying the prey is rather more tricky because it requires very controlled observation. When you go out into the field, you see these dragonflies flying and making sallies, very swift loops and so on, but you do not know whether they succeeded in catching something. It's only rarely that you stop and you see them actually and only when it's large prey, such as a bee that they're eating or another damselfly, that you see them actually with prey and consuming it. Otherwise, they catch them in their front legs and then they transfer them to the mouth and you don't see the action. So we need some sophisticated setups to study that kind of studies. I'm not aware of such studies.
All right. Thanks, Kumaran. In India, are there more species of dragonflies in the plains or at higher altitudes?
If you treat the mountains as one unit, I would think that the mountains have more diversity of dragonflies. The plains tend to be more uniform, despite what I said about Delhi and Madras being different. It just doesn't add up to a large enough number. But if you were to go from one end of the Western Ghats to the middle or the next end, you would find a tremendous diversity of dragonflies. I guess that this applies to the Himalaya as well. As you go really high in the mountains, the diversity of dragonflies drops. There is a certain middle elevation, let's say of 3,000 feet at the Western Ghats, where you find a very, very large number of dragonflies. But if you were to go to the top of our tallest hills, such as to the Palni Hills or the Nilgiris, and go to 7,000 feet, you would find a very small set of dragonflies and damselflies, which do not come down to the lower elevations of the hills or to the plains, definitely. So with all that diversity, I would guess that it's the mountains that have much more diversity.
Okay, great. What are the distinguishing features between a dragonfly and a damselfly?
Structurally, the big difference is that the wings are different. Not only in the way that the wings are held, as many of us know, dragonflies hold their wings out at their sides, whereas damselflies hold them together above their abdomen or along their abdomen. But that's behavior. If you look at the wings themselves, the front wings of the dragonflies are slimmer and of a slightly different shape compared with the hind wings. In a damselfly, they tend to be very similar. All four wings tend to be of a similar shape. Mirror images, of course, but they tend to be very similar. So that is a very simple way of distinguishing dragonflies from damselflies.
Thanks, Kumar. Which place in India has the most dragonflies? How many species of dragonflies are there in the world?
That's two questions. One, there are some hotspots that we know are not explained. There are some places which are very, very rich in dragonflies. In my experience, I have seen the southern end of the Western Ghats, particularly the KMT or the Mundandurai area, to be a very, very rich area. So to Coorg. Coorg, in a more restricted sense, it's extremely rich in dragonflies. In a more widespread sense, as a state, Kerala has got a very healthy dragonfly fauna. And I'm sure that the Northeast is also good. These are the good places, I would say, of India. There was another question, how many species in the world? There is someone keeping track of these things. There is something called the World Odonata List. One of the American universities publishes it and keeps it updated on their website. When I last referred to it, I think there were 6,300 species of dragonfly and damselfly together.
Oh, that's quite a number. Yeah.
Yes.
So this question from Viswajit, how do I get the dragonflies back into my garden? And Supreet Kaur has said, I think we can bring back by changing the insecticides composition. So what would you have to say?
Well, welcome to Biswajit, friend of mine, classmate of my school. Biswajit, you would probably introduce a small pond. I can vouch for this. I live in a flat, but I have a little and keep outside our house at the doorstep with the little lilies, very tiny lilies on them. And we find that it's a magnet for damselflies if they happen to be around in that season. In a larger scale, my friend in Coimbatore has a slightly larger pond in his house where he has fish, frogs, and so on. And that's a good magnet for the dragonflies. So provide them clean water in your garden, as in the form of a pond, you will get the dragonflies in.
Okay. All right. Now, which dragonflies are present in paddy fields?
I think there is a lot of variation from location to location. I wouldn't like to give a blanket answer for that. I think it's very specific to locations. What I say for Madras may not apply for, let's say, any other location in Tamil Nadu, leave alone Kerala? I do not know the answer really. Yeah.
Okay. How can we differentiate a damselfly from a fairy fly?
A fairy fly is a different, belongs to different order itself.
Correct.
As the dragonflies and damselflies have a lot of common traits because they are, and for that reason they are put into one group, the ordinata. Fairy flies, I may be wrong, please check, it belongs to a different order, possibly the same group to which the house flies belong, the Diptera. So they look quite different, is my guess.
Yeah. Okay. What is the lifespan of a dragonfly?
Again, there is no one answer to suit all the dragonflies of the world. There are some extremely long-lived ones in the temperate regions. With the temperatures being what they are in those parts of the world, the development of the larva is extremely slow. The development depends on the number of what is called degree days. The number of days for which the minimum temperature crosses a certain threshold. So only then do the larvae develop into the adult forms. Until then, they remain as larvae. So this process may take years in the temperate zones. On the other end of the spectrum is our tropics of India and other parts of the world around the globe, where development tends to be fast. There are species which go through the life cycle within a few months. So an average of about a year is, again, a calculated guess.
Oh, thanks, Kumran. There are a lot of appreciation and kudos. Wonderful talk, great session, wonderful world, beautiful informative presentation, etc. Thank you very much, Ms. Tatsuvam. I'm certainly going to start watching dragonflies going forward. All right. So then there is a quick question also in between. Is the habitat of the Madras clubtail same as the ditch jewel?
The ditch jewel is a very tolerant species. It tends to live even where the water quality is dubious. I suspect that the clubtail prefers cleaner water. I've asked the people who have seen this species near Bombay at Thane and in West Bengal. They say what they said seems to match the kind of habitat, reedy habitat that we have near Siruvallur and Kuam Lake. So I would guess that it's a very specific kind of habitat with clean water in it that would suit the Madras clubtail.
That will be good, no? If it really comes back, because the Madras clubtail is known not to be there in plenty. I think, yeah. Okay, again, wonderful session, excellent presentation. Yeah, we look forward to you taking us dragon flying over a few weekends via MNS. That's a request.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for this fruitful session. When is the best time to photograph dragonflies during the day?
Dragonflies are fond of bright light in general, except for those species which come out in the evening and get very active at that time hunting these emerging mosquitoes. There are only 3 or 4 such species which I can name. The rest are all fond of sunlight, and your ideal sunlight, a dragonfly day, is a clear sky, a strong sun at about 11 o'clock when things are getting really hot for you, but the dragonflies are out spreading themselves out on the lily pads and on the tips of the grass.
All right. Nandita has a picture of the Crimson Marsh glider taken from near Guduvanjeri in May, June. So she said, could she send it to you so that, you could confirm?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I will try to do that.
Yeah. So Ambika's question is, so their larval lifespan is longer than that of an adult. How long does an adult dragonfly live? You answered that. What is the role of the stigma on the wings?
I think the answer, the suggestion is that it serves as some kind of stabilizer on the wing. But it is beyond my ability to answer that question.
Okay. Congratulations on the sighting of the Konkan rock dweller in Chennai. Thank you for an interesting, enlightening presentation. Fantastic presentation. Nice I opened up. Kumaran, thanks. Excellent papers from India on Odonata as ecological indicators, especially of the health of aquatic ecosystems. Perhaps, yeah. Why are they seen more during or before rain?
Well, this I believe is strongly due to the change in weather and the incoming and the changing wind patterns. I believe there's a lot of dispersal that uses the wind because it obviously saves a lot of energy for a dragonfly to move from one location to another, using the wind rather than traveling in still conditions or against the wind.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Kumaran. Great talk, wonderful presentation. Appreciate the talk, inspiring, wonderful presentation. Any book you would recommend on dragonflies for beginners?
What we went through was Dr. Subramanian's book, which is pan-India in its scope. So it gives an introduction to Indian dragonflies in general. But the one that comes closest to us, I think, is the most useful that we found was Keralathile Thumbigal, Malayalam book. Unfortunately, not translated yet, but it has English names and some basic data about habitats and so on in English. Strongly recommend that book by C.G. Kiran and David Raju.
Can you just repeat the name again?
Keralathile Thumbigal. The authors are C.G. Kiran and David Raju.
Okay. So, thanks, Kumaran. I think that's about it. Always fascinated by their dancing and gliding. Asha says we'll certainly look at them with a more discerning eye from today. So, thanks for a great session. Yeah, there it is. CG Kiran and David Raju, Keralathile Thumbigal. I hope everybody saw it. Thank you, Umesh, for a quick post. And thank you, members of the public, non-members of MNS who registered and have attended this talk. I'm sure you thoroughly enjoyed it. If you wish to become a member of the Madras Naturalist Society, please send me a mail. You have a mail ID with you, and I will send you the necessary details. And as an appreciation of your interest in dragonflies and for having been here with us this morning, I will be emailing to each one of you the latest copy of our journal Black Buck, which is again brought out. It is a bumper issue brought out again to commemorate 40 years of MNS, which is an issue which is completely dedicated to the dragonflies of Madras, featuring write-ups by Kumaran, photographs by both Kumaran and Ramila. So thank you again, once again, Kumaran, for this wonderful session and for a great time that you gave all of us. So till we meet again, adieu.
Adieu.
Thank you.